Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Boost Bureau, where today we're diving into one of the most fascinating motorcycles ever built, the Aprilia RS250. A two-stroke legend that riders still worship decades after it left production. This isn't just about specs or lap times. It's about the creation of a cult icon, the culture that grew around it, and the legacy it carries even in a world that has moved on to cleaner, quieter four-strokes. Over the next 25 minutes, we'll unpack the story in three sweeping arcs, beginning with how this machine emerged at a time when two-stroke performance was hitting its peak, then exploring why its raw thrills and compromises made it both adored and doomed, and finally understanding why it continues to command reverence and rising value today. Whether you've seen one flash past in a blur of blue smoke, or only know it by reputation in motorcycle lore, the RS250 offers a window into a moment when manufacturers dared to put race-bred insanity into the hands of everyday riders. There are motorcycles that are remembered for winning championships, and others that are remembered for defining entire generations of riders. But the Aprilia RS250 does both, blending track pedigree with road accessibility in a way few machines have matched. What made it special was not just the numbers on paper, though a 249cc two-stroke twin pushing around a featherweight chassis certainly raised eyebrows, but the visceral experience, a razor edge between control and chaos, a sound that pierced through traffic like a banshee wail, and the feeling that you were riding something far beyond the category of sport bike. In the US, the RS250 was always rare, but in Europe, Australia, and Japan it became the rite of passage for riders seeking a taste of Grand Prix adrenaline without stepping onto an actual grid. What's most fascinating is how this bike has aged. While many machines from the 90s feel dated, the RS250 has grown more mythic, more desirable, its quirks turning into selling points, its scarcity into treasure. Our journey today isn't a simple history lesson. It's an exploration of desire, identity, and how machines can capture human imagination in ways that transcend horsepower numbers. So settle in as we uncover the origins, the glory and the afterlife of a machine that refuses to fade. Because the Aprilia RS250 is not just a motorcycle, it's a statement, and by the end of this story, you'll see why it still matters to so many riders across the world. The Aprilia RS250 arrived at a moment when two-stroke technology was already at its zenith, shaped by decades of racing development and refined by the obsession to give everyday riders a taste of competition machines. This wasn't just Aprilia's first serious attempt at creating a road-going legend. It was also a statement that the company was ready to play in the same league as Japan's big manufacturers. On paper, it might have seemed like a niche experiment, but on the street it was a revelation, and that duality is where the story truly begins. Micro-story, a racing pedigree in disguise. Aprilia had spent years honing its two-stroke race bikes, dominating the 125cc and 250c classes in the Grand Prix circuit. The RS250 was born directly out of that experience, not just a look-alike, but an actual descendant of the bikes Max Biaggi and Loris Capirossi were racing. The Suzuki-derived engine was tuned to Aprilia's own specifications, while the chassis was bespoke, crafted to balance agility and ferocity. Riders who threw a leg over one instantly felt the lineage. Cornering was sharp, acceleration came with a sudden kick, and the design screamed speed. This wasn't a bike for the casual commuter. It was a promise of the racetrack, wrapped in fairings and sold to the public. Context digest: two strokes versus four strokes. To understand why the RS250 mattered, you have to appreciate the rivalry between engine philosophies. Two strokes were lighter, simpler, and packed explosive bursts of power, while four strokes offered smoother delivery and longer lifespans. By the mid-1990s, emissions rules and consumer demand were pushing the industry toward four strokes, but Aprilia doubled down on the old formula, knowing it could thrill in a way no alternative could. That tension between eras gave the RS250 an urgency. It wasn't just a product, it was a last stand for a disappearing breed. Micro-story, the styling that told a story. The RS250 didn't just rely on performance to stand out, it looked the part of a thoroughbred racer. The fairings were modeled after the company's GP machines, complete with bold graphics and sponsorship-inspired liveries. Even standing still, it radiated motion, the kind of bike that drew crowds at cafes and track days alike. For many young riders, spotting one in the wild was like seeing a unicorn, a rare glimpse of racing glory on city streets. Owning one wasn't just transportation, it was identity, a badge that said you valued purity of performance over convenience. Reflection bridge. The RS250 wasn't just built for speed, it was engineered to spark emotions and carry forward an entire philosophy of riding. Microstory. The rider's initiation. Many first-time RS250 owners describe the experience as overwhelming. Unlike modern sport bikes that deliver smooth acceleration across the rev range, the RS250 demanded precision. It was sluggish below the power band, then erupted in a violent surge once the tack swept past a certain point. For the unprepared, it could feel unruly, but for those who learned to master it, the bike became a partner in a high-stakes dance. That learning curve forged loyalty. Riders didn't just buy the RS250, they earned it. Context Digest, the tuning culture. Because the RS250 required frequent adjustments, jetting, carb balancing, and exhaust maintenance, it created a subculture of mechanically literate enthusiasts. These weren't passive owners. They were caretakers, tinkerers, and obsessives who bonded over the rituals of keeping the machine at its peak. In an era when motorcycles were becoming more user-friendly, the RS250 was defiantly hands-on, deepening the bond between rider and machine. Microstory. Triumphs on track days. The RS250 found its natural environment on closed circuits, where riders could exploit its handling without fear of traffic laws. Stories abound of larger displacement bikes being humbled in the corners by the nimble two-stroke, its featherweight chassis darting where heavier four-strokes lumbered. That David versus Goliath narrative only added to its appeal. On the right course with the right rider, the RS250 could punch far above its weight. Reflection bridge. It was in these moments of surprise and struggle that the RS250 built its cult, a machine that demanded commitment but rewarded it tenfold. Microstory. The sound and the smoke. Ask anyone who has encountered an RS250, and they'll mention the sensory signature. The sharp crackle of the exhaust, the blue haze trailing in its wake, and the scent of burning oil mixed with gasoline. These weren't side effects, they were part of the identity, announcing its presence long before it arrived. For fans, those signals were intoxicating. For critics, they were nuisances. Yet either way, the bike was unforgettable, marking its territory in every sense. Context Digest, market limitations. The RS250's very qualities also limited its spread. It wasn't widely sold in the United States due to emissions and import restrictions, which only heightened its desirability. In Europe and Australia, where regulations were more forgiving, it carved out a loyal base but never became a mass-market product. This scarcity would later fuel its transformation from performance bike to collectible artifact. Microstory. The exclusivity factor. Because of its rarity, RS250 owners often found themselves part of a tight-knit community. Spotting another on the road was cause for a wave or a conversation, and online forums buzzed with technical advice and shared stories. That camaraderie gave the bike a human dimension. Owning one wasn't just a solitary pursuit, it was membership in an unofficial brotherhood. The Aprilia RS250 had become more than a machine. It was a shared obsession, and that collective passion would sustain its legend long after production ended. Now, as we shift deeper into its story, the question becomes how a machine so beloved could also be so short-lived, and what forces conspired to end its run while its fans still craved more. As the Aprilia RS250 gained momentum among enthusiasts, it was already facing headwinds that would eventually seal its fate. Regulatory. Environmental and economic realities collided with the passion of riders, and this conflict shaped not just the RS250's destiny, but the entire two-stroke era. Microstory. The regulatory squeeze. Governments across Europe and beyond were tightening emission standards, and two-strokes, with their oil-burning combustion cycles, were squarely in the crosshairs. What had once been seen as an acceptable trade-off for lightweight power now looks like environmental negligence in an age of rising awareness. Manufacturers knew the writing was on the wall, and Aprilia could only extend the life of its flagship two-stroke for so long before legislation made it unsustainable. Context Digest. Environmental awakening. By the late 1990s, public discourse around clean air and sustainable transportation had shifted. Cities were battling smog, health agencies were linking pollution to respiratory issues, and regulators were responding with stricter rules. Two-strokes with visible smoke and strong odors became easy targets. The RS250's very identity, its sound, its smell, was recast from charm to liability in the court of public opinion. Microstory. engineering against time. Aprilia did what it could to refine the RS250, tweaking jetting, adjusting exhaust designs, and implementing marginal improvements to meet evolving standards. But there was only so much engineering could accomplish without sacrificing the qualities that defined the machine. Each compromise chipped away at the purity of the experience, and Aprilia faced the impossible choice between preserving the legend or complying with regulations that threatened to neuter it. Reflection bridge. The very traits that made the RS250 irresistible to riders were the same ones that doomed it in the long run. Micro-story, market evolution. Sport bike buyers were also changing. As four-stroke technology advanced, manufacturers rolled out mid-weight machines that offered competitive performance with fewer headaches. Smooth power bands, reduced maintenance, and growing reliability made them attractive to a broader audience. The RS250, in contrast, seemed increasingly like a demanding relic, something for purists rather than the mass market. Context digest. Economic shifts in motorcycling. The late 1990s saw motorcycles being marketed less as uncompromising performance tools and more as lifestyle products. Brands invested in marketing that emphasized accessibility and versatility. Within that framework, the RS250 looked out of place. It didn't promise comfort or long-distance practicality, or even affordability of ownership. It promised a raw, unforgiving thrill, and fewer buyers were lining up for that deal. Micro-story. Riders who resisted. Yet there were those who refused to let go. Track enthusiasts, mechanics, and die-hard fans clung to their RS250s, forming dedicated subcultures that resisted the march of progress. They swapped parts, developed workarounds for emissions inspections, and treated their bikes less like consumer goods and more like heirlooms. For them, the bike's extinction only intensified its value, turning every ride into an act of rebellion against the four-stroke future. Reflection bridge. The RS250 was no longer simply a motorcycle. It was becoming a symbol of resistance, a flag planted in defense of passion over pragmatism. Micro-story. The final production years. Aprilia kept the RS250 alive into the early 2000s, but its fate was sealed. Limited runs and shrinking markets meant it never saw wide distribution again. When the last units rolled out of the factory, few could have predicted just how much their value would skyrocket 2 decades later. Riders at the time were more focused on the loss, an entire experience, a way of riding disappearing in real time. Context digest. The collector's pivot. As production ended, used RS250s initially circulated at modest prices, seen as fun but high-maintenance toys. Over time, scarcity flipped the equation. Collectors began hoarding pristine examples, auction houses took notice, and suddenly the RS250 transformed, from cheap thrill to investment piece. This shift mirrored the broader market where once overlooked performance machines gained cult status as cultural artifacts. Micro-story. Pop culture echoes. The RS250's reputation spilled into magazines, online forums, and even racing video games. Its likeness became a shorthand for purity, a reminder of when manufacturers dared to build bikes for passion instead of regulations. For younger audiences who never rode one, it became mythologized, a legendary machine they knew mostly through stories and images. The mythology fueled demand, and demand fueled prices. The Aprilia RS250, once a niche product on the fringes of the market, had become immortalized as the poster child of a lost era. And as we move forward, the question isn't just why it mattered back then, but why it continues to capture hearts and wallets long after its engine stopped rolling off assembly lines. Long after the last RS250 left Aprilia's factory, its story continued to evolve, shifting from living machine to cultural artifact, from performance option to symbol of something bigger. Micro-story. Rising values. As the 2010s wore on, RS250 prices surged on the used market. Bikes that once traded hands for modest sums suddenly commanded 5-figure bids. Collectors treated them as blue-chip assets, aware that each surviving unit was part of a dwindling pool. This transformation from affordable thrill ride to prized treasure reshaped how the RS250 was perceived. No longer just a rider's machine, but also an investment. Context digest. The collector economy. Across the automotive and motorcycle world, certain machines became lightning rods for nostalgia and scarcity, and the RS250 fit the pattern perfectly. Its limited production, track lineage, and outlaw aura gave it all the ingredients of a future classic. As millennials with disposable income sought the icons of their youth, the RS250's desirability soared, and scarcity ensured demand consistently outpaced supply. Micro story: the rider's dilemma. For enthusiasts who had long ridden their RS250s on weekends and track days, the surge in value created an unexpected choice. Do you keep riding and risk diminishing a rare collectible, or do you retire it as a garage queen preserving its worth? This tension split the community. Some refused to let money dictate their joy, while others carefully mothballed their bikes, polishing them more than riding them. Reflection bridge. In this transition, the RS250 embodied a universal struggle between passion and preservation. Micro story: influence on new riders. Even those who never rode an RS250 felt its pull. Online, countless stories, photos, and videos circulated, presenting the bike as an initiation rite from a bygone era. Younger riders looked at it as forbidden fruit, a machine that could never exist today yet represented everything thrilling about motorcycles. Its legend wasn't just preserved by those who owned it, but expanded by those who dreamed of it. Context digest. Two-stroke nostalgia. Broader culture played its part. As emissions regulations eliminated two-strokes from mainstream production, nostalgia for their sound and character intensified. Enthusiasts organized two-stroke track days, festivals, and online communities dedicated to keeping the memory alive. The RS250, with its distinct identity, became a centerpiece of this nostalgia wave, serving as proof that certain sensations simply cannot be replicated by four-stroke machines. Microstory: the legacy on design. Even modern bikes owe something to the RS250. Its focus on lightweight handling over brute horsepower influenced how manufacturers think about agility and rider engagement. Designers and engineers often cite two-stroke machines as inspirations for creating motorcycles that connect emotionally with their riders. Though technology has moved on, the RS250's DNA echoes in every bike that prioritizes connection over sheer numbers. Reflection bridge. Its spirit didn't vanish with its production line. It seeped into the culture of motorcycling, reminding riders what purity feels like. Micro story: community storytelling. Perhaps the most powerful part of the RS250's afterlife lies in the stories passed between riders. Tales of mastering its tricky power band, of humbling bigger bikes on twisty tracks, of friendships built in garages while tuning carbs. All these stories knit together a fabric of memory that keeps the bike alive. Machines fade, but stories endure, and the RS250 has become one of motorcycling's most enduring legends. Context digest: the lesson of scarcity. What sets the RS250 apart is not only what it offered, but when it arrived. Had it been built a decade earlier, it might have been just another fast two-stroke. Had it been built a decade later, it would not have existed at all. Its timing, caught between peak two-stroke technology and the onset of restrictive regulations, cemented it as both pinnacle and swan song. That positioning ensured it would always be remembered as more than just another model. Micro story: worship without riding. Today, many fans who revere the RS250 have never touched one, let alone ridden it. Yet the mythology is so strong that even second-hand encounters, hearing one at a meet, seeing one on display, create lifelong impressions. The RS250 has transcended utility, becoming a talisman for what motorcycles once dared to be. The Aprilia RS250 endures as a paradox, a machine limited by its flaws yet exalted for them, a bike too raw for the mainstream yet too perfect to be forgotten. And as its legend carries forward, it shows us how mechanical creations can outgrow their own lifespans, living on not in dealerships but in memory and culture, and in the imaginations of generations to come. The Aprilia RS250's tale is more than the story of a motorcycle. It is a reminder of how machines can capture a moment in time, embody an ethos, and then outlive their own era through passion and memory. What began as a street-legal echo of a racing dynasty became a symbol of rebellion against conformity, a benchmark of purity that defied both regulation and convenience. Its creation told us what was possible when engineers were allowed to chase excitement over compromise. Its demise reflected the growing clash between thrill and responsibility. And its legacy proves that scarcity and mythology can elevate a machine into the realm of legend. For today's riders and enthusiasts, The RS250 isn't just a machine they admire, it's a mirror reflecting their own longing for authenticity in a world that often feels increasingly sanitized. Some see it as a reminder that performance can be about finesse rather than brute force. Others see it as proof that passion sometimes burns brightest before it fades. Either way, the RS250 stands as an artifact that connects generations. The riders who once wrung its throttle wide open, and the dreamers who still imagine what it would feel like to hear that two-stroke howl on an open road. Its continued presence in auctions, collections, and conversations shows how deeply it resonated and still resonates. More than horsepower, more than lap times, it left behind an aura, an energy that cannot be replicated by cleaner, quieter machines no matter how advanced. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of the Aprilia RS250. That perfection in motorcycling is not about universal appeal, but about striking a chord so powerful that those who hear it will never forget. Thanks for riding with us on Boost Bureau. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.